So cops can't murder, and that's a big problem. Now, this isn't saying that cops are incapable of murdering people. This is more of a legal argument. That is to say that with any competent lawyer or any really law student, it's almost impossible to legally convict a cop of first-degree murder, especially if they're responding to something. If first-degree murder is premeditated. Second degree is feasible in the moment, calculated murder. But again, with a cop sort of responding to a kinetic situation, it's nearly impossible to argue legally any murder charge. So this is a problem because, especially with the recent death of George Floyd, which everyone agrees is tragic in Minnesota, Minnesota's burning right now because we have yet to deal with the question of police brutality. And I don't want to be the typical right-wing person saying, okay, now that there's rioting, this is what the left's always about. This isn't really about police brutality. This is about people just wanting to watch the world burn and loot TVs. No. I'm gonna say there is very legitimate reason to be angry here, even express anger. I think they're crazy statements. I think Maxine Waters blaming this on Trump is ludicrous. It would be equally as ludicrous of me saying, no, this is actually Ilhan Omar's fault, right? It's more likely to be Ilhan Omar's fault because she's more associated with Minnesota, but it's still a ridiculous argument to be made. So I'm going to track back and offer what I think is a productive conversation here. And I'd really like any, Black Lives Matter activists, if you come across this, to really say what you think about this proposal, because I think this is something that can make everyone happy and or unhappy. And that is, we create a separate classification of legal systems for the cops. And I have 3 reasons for this. 1, cops can't murder under the legal definition. It's almost impossible. And yes, it has happened. The Laquan McDonald case, but in order to get a cop on charges, there needs to be a video of him shooting someone in the back. And it's hard. I don't want to say lucky anything in the Laquan McDonald case, but that's the only case where we actually could do something about it. Now, we do want to charge bad police officers who kill people with police brutality. No one wants to see this. Right? And no one really benefits from this. It's not like the Minnesota Police Department's like, whoopee, right? We get to spend, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in legal fees now. Whoop-de-doo. No one wants this. So what if there was a separate system for cops? Because my first argument is it's almost impossible for them to murder under the legal definition. If they're responding to a situation, right, that it can't be first-degree murder, you can't say premeditated, and then killing the act. If there's a firecracker that goes off and you thought it was a gun and it puts you in a different state, I thought I heard a clang, and then his friend said, yeah, there was a clang. Any decent lawyer could get you off of a murder charges as a cop because of the extenuating circumstance of being a police officer. Now, it's not to say there aren't horrible police officers who kill in horrible ways. But what if instead of first or second degree murder, there is a separate legal classification for what cops do, right? So would you at least grant me that what happened to George Floyd and to others, you could say, is unnecessary lethal force, right? It was an unnecessary use of lethal force. What if that was a crime for cops, right? What if there was a code violation to cops that carried, 7 to 10 years in jail for unnecessary lethal force, right? Or excessive lethal force, right? Instead of having murder 1, murder 2, you could have sort of police qualifications, right? Failure to follow procedure resulting in death of innocent. That's X amount of years in jail, right? Then in the handbook, cops have a very clear notice that, okay, if you're, using an unlicensed move to restrain someone and he says, I can't breathe, and he's clearly not a threat and 4 of you are piled on top of him and it leads to his death, well, this is unnecessary lethal force, right? Or it's excessive force leading to innocent death, right? You could have different cases there. Then it's much more likely to get convictions. Now, there's 2 other reasons why it's really hard to have cops under the same legal system. And 2 is, I think this is sort of a truth of all aspects of life, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. And, connections make the difference. That is to say, it's very hard for the legal system to churn on one of its own. This is sort of within everywhere, right? Judges, lawyers, cops, they all have a working relationship, right? They all do, right? If you're a lawyer, you have to work with the cops and testifying. Same with the judges. Judges in a relationship with cops, cops in a relationship with lawyers. There's this very delicate balance. And then to go and be a prosecutor and prosecute a cop, right? If you're the one to prosecute that cop, then you have to then work with the other cops in the district. It could create conflict going forward. So there's disincentives to the prosecutors and the judicial system to apply justice to that police officer, right? I hope that makes sense. So if you had a separate legal system, right, you had sort of judge tribunals of sort of cop tribunals, outside of this, then these judges and these lawyers wouldn't have to worry about going after the bad cops, because it would ruin a relationship down the road. And then the third reason is, in this system, the police union's incredibly strong, way too strong to get actual justice, because the police union in this must defend every police officer every time, right? If you had a system where sort of built in to understand that, okay, it's sort of the police and the police union and what they can afford to defend against, the law, right? If that was sort of implied and accounted for, you'd have it. But, again, this sort of police union amplifies number one and number two, reason one and two, why you can't really get convictions on cops. Right, so I think this would be better. I think it would also decrease the amount of deaths, because if you had a very clearly laid out sort of, here's the sort of police bycode, and it was trained, and police officers really understand there's consequences to unnecessary lethal force, or, excessive force leading to death of innocent, or whatever you want to make the qualifications. And it was in the training, like this, and this is 7 to 10 years. This is 5 to 7 years. This is a 3, I think you would get a lot better understanding, and it would be a lot clearer for cops to sort of know where the line is, because currently in the legal system, there's a bit of protection because they know they're sort of part of the system. They have the union. A lot of times you can get suspended without pay, right? If there was sort of a separate judicial system for this, I know we should all be equal under the law, but I think this is one of the instances where you have to understand, because of the specific job of the police officer, right? And what it entails. Because, any time you go into a situation, like even if there's a horrible person and you're swatting your neighbors, right? You don't like the woman upstairs because she keeps saying you turn down your music, and you call the SWAT team saying she has a bomb, right? It's even if the SWAT team busts in there and kills an 82-year-old lady, it's very hard to argue murder because they were primed with movement and bomb. And you could say, well, we were calling a bomb threat, so we went in, and then I saw something flash in the corner of my eye, and I turned and I fired. That's a high adrenaline, high stress situation that any lawyer can sort of argue out of there. But if you had sort of procedures, failure to follow procedure resulting in death of innocent, right? If that was the crime, right, then it would be, I think you would reduce the odds of this happening, because everyone agrees, right? Even Rush Limbaugh is out there saying, the George Floyd case has him sick to his stomach. I think everyone agrees that this shouldn't be happening. And instead of sort of rallying or ranting about the left rioting, and I really don't want to add more fuel to the fire here. I think the best way to sort of diffuse this would be to sort of offer hopefully productive solutions. And mine is, and I'm not the foremost legal expert, so I'm very open for conversation here, but mine is, what if we had separate laws on lethal force, or specific laws on lethal force for cops that could be tried outside the normal judicial system? Because as it stands right now, it's very hard for cops to commit murder under what we have as murder in law. So I hope that makes sense. If you are a raging lefty Black Lives Matter activist, please be welcome here. Give us your opinions. And if you're one of my regular audience and you're conservative and you don't usually like the raging lefty Black Lives Matter people, I would say, if you want this to not happen again, conservatives, try and engage as honestly as you can and show people on the other side that you're human and you're disgusted by what happened to it, and there is a way to work together. Because if people on the left feel like they're more likely to reason with us, right? If they feel like they can talk to us, they're less likely to burn everything down the next time this happens, which hopefully is never.